back to this online podcast called A Bad Game of Hide and Seek. As you might recall from the other podcast episodes, we are answering this main question of how to love in the midst of pain. Now, the first week we talked about what pain and love is, and how it's okay to have pain in your life, because that's a reminder that you loved that person or the event that happened. And then last week we talked about how to love God. The only way to love God is by having a relationship with Him, which can be really hard sometimes, especially if you're deep down in your hiding place. It is really important to turn to God, even when things are not going your way, because He accepts you for who you are and for where you're at. There is a reason for this season that is happening in your life, and that can be really hard to hear sometimes, but ask God, talk to Him about it. He has a plan. I would love to hear where you guys have challenged yourself and stepped out of your hiding place with God last week. You can always leave a comment below, or if you don't want to share it on social media platforms, you can always email me with questions or comments. So now that we have learned how to love God, as that is the most important thing, we now are moving on to how to love ourselves. When you fall deep into that hiding place, what comes with being in that hiding place is a fun game of what ifs and should haves. When something happens in your life that brings you pain, you start to blame yourself. For example, when I wrecked my car, I went into a dark place of, what if I left school earlier and I wasn't on the road with that guy? Or I should have stopped and got food so I wasn't tired, or at least coffee. I should have, what if I could go on? And I did. I went on playing this game in my head for days of what I should have done and what if I did do this. But does it change the past playing this game? Can it bring my car back? No, it can't. Even though I knew that this what if game is something to never play, I just couldn't stop. I started to get mad at myself, and I actually did the opposite of what self-love is. But besides the point, if you might recall, Jesus said in Matthew the two greatest commandments are to love God and then love others. So why am I even talking about loving ourselves? I mean, last week was about loving God, so this week should be about loving others, right? Well, let's look right at the source of where it says to love God, then to love others. To give a little background of what's happening in Matthew right now, is an expert in the law is testing Jesus to see how well he knows the law. He's testing him by asking him what law is the most important that God has given. And this is basically a trick that he's trying to say, because all of the laws are important, but Jesus responds in a way that is very smart. In Matthew chapter 22, verses 37 and 39, it reads this. Jesus replied, "Love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and all your mind. This is the first and greatest commandment. And the second is like it. Love your neighbor as yourself." By answering this way, he actually taught the so-called expert of the law that all of the commandments that God has given describe how to love God and how to love others if you follow them. But if you think about it, first you should love God to understand what love is, as He's the ultimate example of what love is all about and where love comes from. So it says right here to love your neighbor as yourself. So how can you love others if you don't love who you are? So what is this self-love that we should be having to fill others up? Is it self-advancement or self-worth or self-fulfillment or I know, self-gratification. No, these are all positive feelings, but this is not the right self-love that he is talking about. Those are all examples of what I would call sinful self-love. Loving yourself is good, but it becomes bad when sin is involved in it. Sinful love is all about you becoming the center instead of God becoming the center of your life. So this got a little bit complicated, right? You should love yourself, but not more than you love God. But I have good news, okay? There are two positive versions of self-love that we are going to be talking about today. This is all about showing yourself love by taking care of yourself. It is called natural self-love. You know, eating, sleeping, staying hydrated, showering, going to the doctor when you need to, things like that. When we are going through a really dark time, these can seem really hard to do. But these are crucial things to do. Elijah was going through a rough time after Queen Jezebel threatened to kill him when he defeated the prophets of hers. In 1 Kings chapter 19, verses 3 through 5, it reads this. Elijah was afraid and ran for his life. When he came to Beersheba in Judea, he left his servant there. Okay, so if he left his servant, that means that he really didn't have a lot of time to pack food, right? Or a comfy pillow or water. He was so afraid that he didn't want to stay any longer. He just left, right? But it continues here. Well, he himself went a day's journey into the desert. He came to a broom tree, sat down under it, and prayed that he might die. He said this, I have had enough, Lord, he said. Take my life. I am no better than my ancestors. Then he lay down under the tree and fell asleep. That's really rough. He's having a really bad day, right? He's gone, it sounds like a day without food because it doesn't mention he brought food with him or anything like that. So he hasn't eaten, he's tired, he just wants to give up. So how do you think God replied to this prayer of wanting to just die and to take his life? So it says this, all at once an angel touched him and said, get up and eat. He looked around, and there by his head was a cake of bread baked over hot coals in a jar of water. He ate and drank, and then he laid back down. So by him saying that he laid back down, he ate this food, but he still really didn't have energy, motivation, and probably still wanted to be left alone. But do you think God left him alone? God never leaves us alone when we need him. And we always need him. Even though Elijah probably wanted to be left alone, God didn't leave him alone. In verse 7, it continues saying, the angel of the Lord came back a second time, touched him and said, get up and eat, for the journey is too much for you. So he got up and ate and drank. Strengthened by that food, he traveled 40 days and 40 nights until he reached Horeb, the mountain of God. Did you hear that? He was strengthened by the food. This just shows how important it is to take care of your body. Elijah needed to care for himself, just as you need to care for yourself. God brought him what he needed. God does the same for us. So, are you taking what God is giving you to help you self-care? Or are you avoiding it? It says in 1 Corinthians chapter 6, verse 19, "Do you not know that your body is a temple of the Holy Spirit, who is in you, whom you have received from God? You are not your own. You were bought at a price. Therefore, honor God with your body." Don't forget that your body is a temple. So stop and breathe. And remember that you got this. This natural self-love can seem as fun as something like watching a funny movie and laughing, because that's good. Or it could be something that's not as fun as going to the doctor and making sure that you're healthy. It is all about seeking to live longer and not trying to die like Elijah wanted. Now, if you are having these feelings of not wanting to live, please seek guidance from a counselor or a therapist, or talk to someone. Don't be quiet. Or if you don't want to talk to someone, there is an emergency hotline that you can call or text. It's 988. And this is a free hotline for anybody who's struggling with mental health issues. Mostly it's for suicidal thoughts or ideations, but it can be used for other things too. Like I said, don't be quiet. Your life matters. Don't forget about Jeremiah 29:11. This is a verse that I turn to whenever I'm in a really low place. It says, "For I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord. Plans to prosper you and not to harm you. Plans to give you a hope and a future." God has a plan for you. And it's not just any plan. He wants you to prosper, which means that you have a purpose for your life. So hold on and wait, because it's going to be worth it. God's doing something and will be doing something great in your life. So don't take away that opportunity. Now, the last self-love we will be discussing today is a love of gratefulness. This self-love is holy and pure as it comes from Christ. Mark Jones wrote an article about this self-love, and he said, "To truly love ourselves, we must love ourselves as God would have us love ourselves." If you think about it, and you really think about what that says, it's not that complicated. But let's break it down. So, how does God love us? Or how does he want us to love ourselves? In Matthew chapter 16, verses 24 and 25, then Jesus said to his disciples, "If anyone would come after me, he must deny himself and take up his cross and follow me. For whoever wants to save his life will lose it, but whoever loses his life for me will find it." What he's trying to say is, you know that example of all those sinful loves that I was listing in the beginning? What we got to do is deny them and get rid of them, which is a lot harder than just saying what I just said, like, I'm going to deny this. You actually have to stop doing them, which can be really hard. But the closer you walk with God, the more you will know who you really are. And that's what this verse is really talking about. And that's the amazing self-love that is above this natural self-love that I talked about before, is finding who you are through Christ. Now, this self-love that I am talking about is really hard, and everyone is at their own stage of self-love. I challenge you this week to take a break from all the busyness of this season and see where you are spiritually, physically, mentally, and emotionally. And think about, like, where's God in all of this? Because, like I mentioned, you have to take up your cross, and you need Christ to do that. So where is he at during these stages? Also, I suggest you to listen to this new Christmas song I heard on K-Love. It's called Christmas Hits Different by Toby Mac and Tasha Layton. I suggest you just stop and listen to the words being sung. This song has a part that says, I'll be right there. Who's that person in your life that's going to be right there for you? Is it God? Thank you so much for joining this episode of A Bad Game of Hide and Seek. I hope to see you on Christmas Day at 12 to hear how to love others in the midst of all this pain.